I worked for primarily the Special Forces. We refer to them as the Green Berets. And they pretty much were responsible for the efforts that were made in the Central Highlands, because you didn't have a lot of times where you would have big concentration of troops on our part to accomplish something. The Green Berets worked in what they called A teams, 12 people, that's all. And they did a variety of different things. Everything from going into a village and providing a lot of items that they had never had before. For example, inoculations. Helping them get through living literally off the land. Teaching them about some things as simple as how do you deal with a water supply that is not turned on at the faucet, and you have that. What do you do about things of that nature? So it was a different kind of war in the Central Highlands. In supporting those folks and everything, I got shot down twice and I crashed once. I crashed, which was the last thing that occurred in that manner. Was I was flying and supporting another one of our allies, which were the South Koreans. And they had artillery bases in a variety of locations. And so it was not uncommon that from time to time we would resupply those bases with artillery rounds. And a Huey, which is what I was flying, could carry about 3,000 pounds of ammunition in the back of the Huey. I had that. I was making an approach into an artillery base, and I was about 800 feet in the air. And as I started my descent to go down, my entire, you don't have to take a picture of this, my entire rotor head came off of the aircraft. And it sucked the transmission right out of the aircraft. At that time, you're along for the ride. There's nothing you can do to continue to fly the aircraft because it's falling. And it's a little late to wonder what did I do wrong. As it turned out, I didn't do anything wrong, but those are the kinds of things that run through your mind. In that fall, because of the rotations of the rotors, it caused and not having the rotors, it caused the aircraft to make a 360-degree roll. But it was continuing to fall at the same time. When it landed or hit the ground, it landed so hard that the skids right here were bent up around the aircraft. And the aircraft itself bounced like that. We had a crew of 4, myself, my co-pilot, the door gunner, and the crew chief, which was the standard crew on that. Fortunately, we all got out of the aircraft. And while there were a series of injuries, we all survived. As I said, the aircraft bounced like this, and when and I can't tell you how long, it wasn't very long, but before I actually was able to become aware that A, I was alive, and B, I was still strapped in my seat in the aircraft, and the engine was still running. And now that's possible with losing the rotor and the transmission because the engine just kept running. But I also knew we had all the ammunition in the back. So I said over the intercom, "Get out, get out, get out." And I got out of the aircraft, and the crew members got out of the aircraft, and I got about as far as from here to that wall over there, that far wall. And it dawned on me that that engine was running, that there was hot fuel dumping on that hot engine, and all of that ammunition below was there, and it was going to create a fire, and there would be a humongous explosion. So I in turn turned around, went back to the aircraft, turned the engine off, turned and went to get away from the aircraft again, and this time I got about half the way, and my adrenaline stopped pumping, and I fell, and I couldn't get up. End result, that's one of the reasons I walk with a cane today. Okay, they came in, picked us up, took us back to our headquarters, and we had a flight surgeon who rotated among several aviation companies, just so it would be the day that he was going to be there. And they took me in to see the flight surgeon, and when I say they took me in, basically they had my arms around two guys, and there was a third one behind me, and they were lifting me and almost making me walk that way. And the flight surgeon talked to me and talked to the other crew members, and he asked me, he said, "Ned, tell me what happened." And so I told him, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Bend over and touch your toes." And I said, "Not going to happen. I can't do it." And he said, "Well, turn around." And he took his thumb and he went up and down my spinal column, and he would go, "Does that hurt? Does that hurt?" "Yes, yes, yes, yes." He said, "Well, I have good news and bad news." And I'm not kidding. These are the words that he used and such. He said, "The good news is I don't think your back is broken." Well, the operative word there that he used was "I don't think." But he said, "I have no way to x-ray you right now, but he said, I don't think your back's broken." I said, "Well, what's the bad news?" He said, "We're short of pilots. You're flying tomorrow." And I just kind of went, "You're kidding." And he said, "No." He said, "We're short of pilots, and you're going to have to fly tomorrow." And I said, "I can't even crawl into the aircraft anymore." He said, "That's okay. We'll pick you up and put you in the seat, and you're going to have to continue to fly until we either get some more pilots in here, or until we can get you someplace where we'll get an x-ray." Well, I continued to fly for over a week before they got me to a place where I could have my back x-rayed. They x-rayed my back, and I had a fracture of my entire spinal column from the base of my skull to the top of my tailbone, right down, and every vertebra I had was compressed. I said, "What do I do about this pain?" And he said, "Well," he said, "we don't exactly have a real good facility here to treat your pain." So he handed me a pill bottle. It was about like that. It wasn't even full of the pill bottle. He said, "Take 2 of these when you feel really, really bad with that." And he said, "I didn't tell you this, but go find some scotch." and I took 2 of the little pills, which was Darvon, and I would take a drink of scotch, and I could at least then lay down and relax and get a little sleep. Later on, we have found that, of course, the damage to my back has been lasting. There's not anything they can do about it. And they have thought about trying to do some things, and either they find out that doesn't work or it's useless to even try those. So that's a memory that I have that I live with every day. A lot of things I can't do that I used to do. I walk with a stick for that reason. I can't bounce around like I used to. But I still try to do as much as I can. I don't want to be an invalid. You want me to go on? I know, I can tell. The other time. Did you turn it?
I did turn it.
The other thing that the second time I was shot down, we were working with the Special Forces over in Laos, which was a adjoining country. And it was always kind of a joke that we had about, well, we weren't there. Well, we were there. And we did a lot of things in Laos that, under normal circumstances, you wouldn't do, but you didn't have any choice. And we had a Special Forces group that was involved in doing some reconnaissance work over in Laos, trying to tell what the NVA were doing, the North Vietnamese. And so my task was to go in and pick them up and extract them, bring them out, and take them back home, or what they called home. There were 5 of them, and that was typical on the number that would go into situations like that. But they had literally been living for almost a month in the jungle by themselves. All they had is what they carried in, as far as ammunition, food, and even water, because they'd have to find water, and you hoped it was safe to drink. They did have little pills you could put into a canteen, and supposedly that was going to purify it. Made the water taste awful, but it was supposed to be purified. But they had to live on that. And so their living conditions were not the best in the world. But when they had contacted and said, we need to get out of here, I happened to be the person on call to go get them. And went and picked them up, and was coming out of an LZ, landing zone, and picked them up, took off, cleared the trees, and I was continuing to climb to get as high as I can, as fast as I could, and we started taking fire. And I knew I had gotten hit 4 times, and it didn't take long to realize that one of those had hit a fuel line. So I was losing fuel, and one of them also hit the engine, and that caused me to lose power. So I wasn't going to be able to go as fast, as high, or anything else. All I was going to do was gradually fall, not like with the rotor head coming off, but just a gradual going down with it. Well, the problem was that there wasn't any place to land except where I came out of, and the NVA had that place surrounded, and they were still shooting at us from that location. So I just had to continue to go as far as I could, as fast as I could, and continue to look for a place to land. Well, as it turned out, there wasn't any place to land because we were in what was called a triple canopy jungle. Triple canopy jungle is where you have a lot of trees in a jungle that grow up to this high. And generally that can be as high as 100 feet. And then there are more in the jungle, more trees that are interspaced with those, and they grow taller than those trees. And then you have a third set of trees that grow even taller. So what you have is 3 layers of trees, thus the term of triple canopy. Well, as we got down close to the ground, it became obvious I wasn't going to get out of the area, so the only thing I could do was to land in the top of the trees. Well, it's not really an LZ in the top of a tree, someplace where you can land, set the aircraft down, get out, and walk away. No, that doesn't work, because you literally are landing in tops of trees that may be as much as 300 feet above the ground. And the only way you can safely do that is you want to be sure that you can get out of the aircraft, because if you go down and you land and the rotor's still turning, all you're going to do is mow the top of the trees, and you can't get out of the aircraft while the rotor's turning, so you're going to have to sit there. So you lay the aircraft on its side, and when you do that, the rotor stops turning and it settles. And when it's settled and stopped, we said, well, now all we have to do is to get down out of the aircraft to the ground. You don't usually carry ropes in the Hueys. Fortunately, this group, because of the nature of their mission, had ropes. So we rappelled out of the helicopter to the ground, and the crew chief had his leg broke when we hit the top of the trees. Well, he wasn't going to be able to walk, and we weren't going to leave him there. So we rappelled down, got our bearings, and took turns carrying the crew chief with us, carry him on our backs. And we spent 6 days and 7 nights escaping and evading back into South Vietnam. Every one of those days and nights, I asked myself, would I ever see home again? Had no way of knowing. Fortunately, I did. Fortunately, we all got out alive, all to turn around and do the same kind of thing later on again, because that's what our job was. So we did that. There were other incidences like that. One of the ones that she referred to is that we worked very closely with mountain yards. Mountain yards were individuals, best way I can describe them then, and still would describe them today, is they're like an Indian tribe. And they had been run out of China over 500 years ago. And they had just gradually moved on each time that they had been pressured to move. And they moved out of China into Burma, from there into Laos, and finally into what became South Vietnam. And they were, as I said, truly a tribe that when the Special Forces went into the highlands, they befriended. And so therefore the Montagnards were very close to the Special Forces. And they became our allies. And they knew the area where they lived. They could tell you every trail, where it went, how long it was. They could tell you the whole thing. Most of the time their villages were up on top of a mountain, thus the name Mountain Yards, and because it gave them the ability to look around and see what was coming, what was going around, and stuff of that nature. Your average mountain yard is not very big. Average male is about 5'5". They became, though, literally scouts for us. Where if we were going to go when I say us, I'm talking about the U.S. Army, if we were going into an area that was unknown to us, they could scout ahead like the Indians used to scout for the cavalry. And they could tell us what was coming, what was out there. So we had a sense of caring about them because they cared about us. And when it became known that they were in danger or their village was in danger, we would do anything and everything that we could to save them. We got a call one day, and they said we need to help such and such special forces operations evacuate a mountain yard village. And that was all the information that we were given, other than the location of the village. I didn't have any idea how many people were there, how many people were we going to have to evacuate, none of that. But we knew the location, and we cranked and were off. And they also told us that because we didn't have that many aircraft with us at that time, they were sending more as well. Well, that's always a red flag right there. The more helicopters they send, the bigger the job's going to be. So we ultimately ended up with about, I think it was 9 or 10 aircraft, which, considering the fact that we usually worked in groups of 2 or 3, that told us something right off the bat. We got to the location, and the Special Forces people said, we're going to have to totally evacuate the village. Nobody can stay. And I said, okay, fine. So we started getting them lined up and such. And the Huey is designed to carry 8 American soldiers and all their gear. Well, that's what they're designed to do. In Vietnam, we couldn't do that for a variety of reasons. The weather could be part of it. The altitude, the higher you go in a helicopter, the less of a load you can carry, things of that nature. So generally we carried 5 or 6 is what we normally carried in there, Americans, and all their gear and that kind of stuff, and a crew of 4. So 9 people is what we could carry. So we got going and got looking and everything, and we started doing, and we knew right away that because of the number that they had, because when we said we're evacuating the mountain yard, that meant everybody, babies, kids, women, men. We just said, well, we'll just have to pack them in as much as we can, and do it that way, and which simply meant that we were going to put more than 9 people on board each time. I happened to, which was a kind of a normal thing. You usually take your well, I'll say experienced pilots. One of them will fly lead on a mission, and the other one will fly what we referred to as tail end Charlie. That's the last aircraft. And I just said, I'll fly tail end Charlie, because I wanted to be sure that we didn't leave anybody. And so we made, collectively, and we set it up so that there would always be a couple of aircraft over the village at all times, to where we were going to put them down. And we made 3 runs around to get what we thought was everybody out. And on the last go round, everybody was saying, man, I've been carrying 9 or 10, and I got 12 this time. So I thought, well, I'm either going to have nobody or I'm going to have everybody on my tail end Charlie routine. I got down, and you could see the North Vietnamese coming up the mountain. They were getting that close to the village. And if anybody had been left, they would have been killed. If they had been a female, they would have been raped and then killed. I mean, the North Vietnamese just did not like the mountain yards, because they knew what they did to help us. So I told the crew chief when I got on the ground, I said, okay, I said, I don't care how you do it, get them in the aircraft. We never discussed numbers. I said, get them all in the aircraft. And we waited, and we waited, and by that I mean waiting, because they said the only way we're going to get them in is stack them like cordwood. And literally they would put them in side by side, and then they'd put another group right on top of them, same thing, and again and again, and even crossed them like that. And finally, the crew chief said, they're all loaded. And I said, get in. I went to hover the aircraft, which is what you do with a helicopter when they come up like so, and they're supposed to be 3 feet up in the air, and they're not moving, but they're up like that. I couldn't get up. So I knew that the load was fairly heavy, to say the very least, even though we were up high in the highlands and such. Fortunately, because if it had not happened, we would have never gotten that last load up and out of there. But that village was built on top of a hill, but there was also a cliff on one side of it, and it fell. The cliff fell. Didn't really know how high it was, but you could tell it was a pretty good sized cliff. And as it was, I didn't have any choice, but I had to get out of there, and I knew that if I got it into the air in a flying position, I could probably hit what we call translational lift. And what that is when you get an aircraft, a helicopter, in flight so that the rotors are doing in such a way that they're actually gathering, grabbing some of the air, and it can fly. So I thought, well, that's the thing, and I just told everybody to hang on, and I bounced and just kind of got it light on the skids, and never could get it to hover. Got it light on the skids, and I got it right over the edge, and I fell. And I hit translational lift before I hit the ground. And just gradually above the ground, I got it to the point where it was flyable, and I got it going, got it to the place we were taking them. And I knew that it was going to be, there was a heavy load, because the approach was a very difficult one to make, because it was like, you know, you're overloaded. Okay, I knew I was overloaded, but you know, landed, and when I landed, it was so, I just felt, you know, like that. And I kind of slumped back into the seat, and the crew chief came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "You want to know how many?" And I said, "No." And then I said, "Yeah, I really do." He said, "You're not going to believe me." And I said, "Just tell me how many." At 28. Counting 28 plus 4 crew members. And they were literally stacked in like cordwood. That's one of those community service jobs we did. Didn't have anything to do with combat, but it had, it would have been if would have gotten caught up there. My wife said I should tell you what I did when I came back. I had in the military, you get ready to be transferred, and you get a sheet, and it's called a dream sheet, and you fill it out with 3 choices of where your next duty station, where you would like to go on your next duty station. Well, at that time in Vietnam was going on, helicopter pilots really didn't have a whole lot of choice. And by that I mean you were going to go from flight school to Vietnam, you were going to fly your tour in Vietnam, you were going to come back, you were going to go to the flight school, and you were going to be a instructor pilot there, and then you were going to turn around and go right back to Vietnam and do what you did there again. And then by that time, when you got out of flight school, you had what was called an obligated tour. It meant that you had committed to stay so long. And by that time, your obligated tour would be up. Well, I thought, I don't want to do 2 tours of this stuff. So I had extended for a period of time, 6 months. And by doing that, I could make it, if I made it through my tour in the 6 months, then I would go, I figured I'm going to go to Walters or Rucker as an instructor pilot. Well, I had become an instructor pilot when I was in Vietnam. So I thought, man, that's a given. I know where I'm going, one of those 2 places. And but at the end of that time, I would not have to go back to Vietnam a second time. I would have served 18 months instead of 24 months before my obligated tour was up. Well, I filled out my dream sheet and I put down Fort Walters, Texas, because that was close to where my parents lived. And I thought, hey, why not do that? That'd be kind of cool. And I put down Rucker as the second choice, and I don't even remember if I put anything down on the third choice. You have to put down one choice, but you don't have to put down all three. Most people put down three because they figure, well, if I don't get one, I'll get two or something like that. And we knew what we were going to get, so it didn't really matter. So I get my orders, and it said Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And I thought, what in the hell am I going to Fort Belvoir for? The only thing at that time was the engineer school that the Army had, where they would take people that were going to be engineers and train them. And I thought, what do they need a helicopter for? And so I went into my company commander, who was a nice guy, a really, really good guy. And I said, can I get my orders changed? And he said, Mike, you know better than that. You can't change your orders. He said, let me see your orders. And he took them and he read them. And he looked back at me and he had this strange look on his face. And he read them again. And he said, Mike, you don't want to change your orders. And I said, why not? I don't want to go to Belvoir and fly a bunch of guys around learning how to blow up bridges. I've been watching that going on for a long time. He said, that's not what that unit does. I said, well, what do they do? He said, that's the Army contingent of pilots that flies for the White House and the Pentagon. I said, don't change my orders. I'll suffer through. So I spent my last active duty time flying in Washington, D.C., flying for the White House and flying at the Pentagon. At that time too, the Army was going through this thing where they had an air mobile. You guys need to leave. Oh, okay. They were developing what they called air mobile divisions, and they were divisions of a whole bunch of helicopters. And by that, what they would do is take an infantry division, and they would assign helicopters to that division, and they would become the mobility, the air mobility of that division. So instead of having to move a lot of troops from point A to point B in trucks or jeeps or something like that, you could move them in helicopters. And you could do it in a combat situation and things of that nature. So, but then the military doesn't always think ahead, shall I say. They got ready, and they did have one air mobile division, which they had in Vietnam at the time that I was over there. And they got ready, and they were getting ready to come up with this second air mobile division and such. And it dawned on them that they didn't have any general officers that were qualified to command an air mobile division, because you had to be a rated aviator to do that, because they had one general officer that was a rated aviator. So they said, okay, and so when I was in Washington and right there at the Pentagon, they said, okay, we have I think it was 9 of us that were instructors, and they said, you guys are going to set up a modified flight school for general officers. And by that meant that we would go to their offices and basically hold a class on aerodynamics or something else that was critical to the flying of a helicopter, and about what the aircraft did from the standpoint tactically speaking. And then we would literally take them flying for a while, and they had to be able to take off and land a helicopter. If they could hover one, that was even better. But very few of them ever learned how to hover, because even when you go through flight school, they take you out to a 40-acre field, and then they say, now you got to learn how to hover and hold it still. And it would take a 40-acre field because you're like this the whole time, you know, and such. But they were smart enough to say that any general officer, once they got their wings, would always have to have an instructor pilot at the other set of controls. So that part was smart. In other words, all they had to do was to sit up there in the front end there and not concern themselves too much with the controls of the aircraft, but they could tactically take charge of the operation and things of that nature. So that was another one of the nice little side jobs that we had, is that you got to work with some of the really nice general officers. Some of them aren't real nice, but some of them are. And the first graduate we had, and this name may not mean anything to you all, but he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was General William C. Westmoreland. And he was the man who was in charge in Vietnam when Vietnam was going on. He was the top military commander. And he had come back, become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was our first graduate through that program. That particular unit also had some other areas that really had of interest besides the day-to-day stuff, which was the flying somebody who was on the president's staff, or as it turned out to be, maybe the vice president or the president, to go someplace from point A to point B. That was part of our day-to-day stuff. We also had other duties that included, we kept on standby 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 4 aircraft. And those aircraft were designed to evacuate the White House in the case that somebody in Russia pushed the button and we were going to war. And we had to evacuate them, whoever at that particular time was in the White House, to get them out and to secure locations. There were 3 locations that were considered to be secure. One of which there were individuals that were taken there and picked up at the White House or right in front of the Capitol and taken to Andrews Air Force Base, which is the Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. And they put them into aircraft that were designed to be like a command center. And they would get them airborne and away from the Washington, D.C. area as quickly as possible. The second location was off the coast of Maryland. There was continually a World War II aircraft carrier, and it was designed and had been reworked in the area so that it could house a large number of politicians, military personnel, things of that nature. And we would carry them from where we picked them up to that location, and that meant that every one of our pilots had to be carrier qualified. Well, nobody in the Army was carrier qualified except for the people that had gone to that unit. So that was something else. You had to become carrier qualified, which meant that you had to fly and land on an aircraft carrier. Every 3 months you had to make 6 landings, 6 during the day and 6 at night. So that took up a little bit of our time, just keeping people current in that area. The third location was not far from Camp David, which is, I don't know if you are familiar with that, but that's the area where the White House people go for a relaxing weekend, shall I say. But they also have conferences out there and such. But not far from Camp David, there's an area that is underground, cut in the side of one of those mountains, and it can hold, it's like a big dormitory, and it can hold every member of Congress. It's that large, and it keeps enough of a food supply that it can house all of those people for up to 6 months. Now, they're not going to get real good food, but they're going to get fed. And then once they get into that facility, it has got doors that come down and they can stand a atomic blast. So it's a way of sorting out the leadership in 3 different locations and such. The only problem that we had is that we never wanted to be the ones that took them to the aircraft carrier, because the aircraft carrier was a small one in the sense that it couldn't hold a whole lot of helicopters. So we would have to push the aircraft off the side of the ship, and then we would be stuck on the ship. So we didn't want to do that. But it was evidently a very interesting unit to be assigned to, because the executive officer of the unit I was in Vietnam, when he saw my orders, he said, my God, he was a graduate of West Point, and he said, I have been trying to get in that unit ever since I got out of flight school and graduated from West Point. He said, I don't know. He said, how did you get there? I said, I don't have a clue. I said, I don't have a clue. They just sent me there. But that was a good assignment, obviously. I could have stayed there as far as I was concerned for the rest of a 20-year tour in the military, and that would have been cool as far as that goes. I was going to tell you something else, and now I forgot what it was. Oh, just a little bit of a ha-ha moment. People always say, well, what was it like the first time you got shot at? And I said, well, I have to be honest with you. When I graduated from flight school, which was at Fort Rucker, I was assigned to a unit at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, that was going to go to Vietnam. I mean, we knew we were going. It was just a matter of we didn't graduate from flight school one day, go home, have 30 days leave, and then get on a plane and go to Vietnam. It was going to be about 3 to 4 months before we actually went to Vietnam. But we were going to go, so that was kind of a given. So we got there, and within 2 weeks, they had the riots in Detroit. And I don't know if you all have studied in any of those yet or not, but anyway, in the summer of 1967, they had a humongous riot in Detroit. The people that were there just got totally carried away, and they began to burn their own town, their homes, their businesses. It was just unheard of. And at first the mayor said, he put the police on the street and said, you got to stop this violence and everything. And in a while that didn't work, so he called in the state troopers, and that didn't work. So he said, well, called his friend who was the governor, and the governor said, well, I'll activate the National Guard. That didn't work. So the governor called the President of the United States, who at that time was LBJ Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Johnson said, okay, he said, I will send federal troops. But here is my one criteria. And he told the major what it, I mean the governor what it was, and he said, that's fine, I'll take it, what, you know, it doesn't matter, whatever it is. Well, what Johnson did was declare martial law. Now, I don't know if y'all have studied what martial law is or not, but if they declare martial law, you have no civil rights. There is a curfew, and you have to be in your house during that curfew. And it usually will run, say, from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 8 o'clock the next morning. And if you got a job, you can go to your job. Otherwise, you're going to stay at home. And it was a way of getting people off the streets and then getting the situation addressed. Well, he sent elements of the 101st Airborne Division and our aviation company, because we were the aviation support for the 101st there. So we went to Detroit during the riots. And during that time, we got shot at. So the first time I ever got shot at flying a helicopter was in the United States of America. It wasn't in Vietnam. And I said, this is ridiculous, you know. And then when I came back, I'm in Washington, D.C., and I had flown some people out to Camp David, and I kind of thought, well, I'll take a scenic route back because it's out in the Appalachian Mountains, and at certain times of the year it's beautiful out there. I mean, absolutely beautiful. And so I swung way out and kind of taking a long route back in, and lo and behold, I flew over some revenuers, and they took shots at me. And I said,
not revenuers, moonshiners.
Well, oh, moonshiners, yeah, I said revenuers, yeah, okay, moonshiners. The last time I got shot at flying a helicopter was in the United States. So I made the rounds, I guess, is to say. Any other questions?
Covered it all.
I did bring a couple of things, and that's me. Long time ago. Very long time ago.
You didn't say who your student was.
Hmm?
You didn't say who your student was. Who was your student that you taught how to fly?
I said William C. Westmore.
Well, you didn't tell me that was your student.
Oh, well. That's what was painted on my helicopter. So
You're not supposed to have it.
I saw my call sign was Snoopy. So that's a typical picture of, you know, a helicopter pilot and such, just downtime waiting for the mission. That was my picture at a flight school when I graduated from flight school. And just 3 more pictures, just to give you an idea of what, you know, what it looked like. People say, well, what did you wear, what did you do, that kind of stuff. We were issued a pistol. Is the only weapon that we were actually issued, and it was a .38 caliber revolver, which meant that we had a pistol that would fire 6 rounds, which was totally useless in the jungle. So the first thing I did was go and trade mine and got a .45 automatic, and I carried that in a shoulder holster, because the pistol that they issued us was on a belt, and when you put that belt on, you're trying to seat yourself inside the helicopter. Well, there really wasn't room because of that. So I just got a shoulder holster and put my .45 automatic in it, And the advantage to the automatic was that if you dropped it in a puddle, you could pick it up, wipe it off, and use it. If you did a revolver that way, you'd have to clean it and do everything else before you could use it again. But the automatic was very good in that regard. However, we still didn't have rifles. So if we got shot down, all we had was the pistol. So I scrounged around and got myself a rifle. It was a M1 carbine. And it was lightweight, it was short, but you could hang it on the back seat, or the back of the seat, the pilot seat. And so I had that and used that, and fortunately when I got shot down, it was a nice thing to have. Otherwise, all you really had was a survival knife that they gave you, and the blade on it was about that long, and so that was not as useful as it could have been. But I had sense enough to know before I even left, I had a good hunting knife, so I had a good holster made for it, and I took that with me, and I carried that the whole time I was there.
What kind of hunting knife? What kind of hunting knife?
A Bowie knife, because I'm from Texas. It had to be a Bowie knife.
Where'd you keep it?
I wore it on my belt. The other one, the one you're talking about, was the one that had the knuckles on it. That's what the flight helmet looks like. And this thing would go up and then down. Those are the gloves. Because you had to wear gloves all the time. They never did make any sense because we wore fatigues just like the grunts did, but the gloves were made out of Nomex, which meant that they wouldn't burn. So your hands would survive and the rest of you would be burned. What can I say? What can I say?
How'd you cool your
But
beer?
this was
How'd you cool your beer? Don't like that.
real important stuff. How did we cool our beer? We didn't have refrigeration. In fact, we didn't always have beer, but we didn't have refrigeration. But when we worked with the Australians, great people. I mean, really, really great people. I learned a lot from them, and they always had beer because their military would supply it for them, and so they, however, did not drink their beer cold. They always drank it warm. So said, well, you know, we can chill ours. Maybe we can get our beer from the Aussies and then we'll just chill it. So we did. And the way you chill your beer is that you take a t-shirt and you put the can in the t-shirt, you roll it up, fold both ends over on that like that. And then in the helicopter you have a fire extinguisher. So you take the fire extinguisher, go, psh, 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 you get over here. The only problem we have with that is they always wanted to know why the fire extinguishers in the helicopters were always empty. They just could not understand that. So we had those little games that were played and such.
Tell them about the bowling.
The what?
The bowling. You're on the bowling team.
Oh, she was. There is also a bag that the helmet fits in, and it looks like